Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling something really fundamental in law: self-help. When is something that looks like a crime battery, assault, maybe even killing someone actually legally justified?
Exactly.
We're digging into the edges of self-preservation, this whole idea of justification. If you can prove it, it's basically the ultimate defense, right?
It is. And our mission today, for you listening, is to go beyond just knowing the terms. We want to give you the actual tools to dissect defenses, like
Mhm.
self-defense, the duty to retreat, what happens when someone makes a reasonable mistake, and, the pretty limited rights you have when defending property.
Okay.
We're aiming to model that rigorous element-by-element legal thinking courts use so you can see exactly where those lines are drawn.
All right, let's jump right in then, the big one. Self-defense against unlawful harm. What's the main sort of black letter rule there? And what's that critical point about the kind of force you're facing?
Okay, the rule is quite specific. Someone who is not the aggressor. That's key.
Yeah.
They're justified in using a reasonable amount of force when they reasonably believe two things.
Okay.
First, they reasonably believe they're in immediate danger of unlawful bodily harm. And second, they reasonably believe that the force they're about to use is necessary to stop that danger. And crucially, the force they're up against must be unlawful force. You can't legally defend against force that's permitted by law.
Right, that lawful versus unlawful distinction feels absolutely central. Let's test it. We have a classic scenario. It references the policy in Daniel v. State. So imagine D reaches into his coat, looks like he's pulling a gun to rob V, trying to defend himself, shoots at D but misses. D then shoots V, kills him. D claims self-defense. First, what are the legally dispositive facts?
Okay, the key facts are D was the one who started it, the initial aggressor, by trying to commit a felony, armed robbery. V shot back defensively against that specific unlawful act. Then D killed V while V was, in the act of defending himself.
Got it. And what was the core legal issue here for the court?
Well, the precise legal question was this. Does an initial aggressor, someone who starts the trouble, keep the right to self-defense when the victim uses lawful force to fight back?
What rule of law did the court apply? Could you state the full black letter rule for this aggressor situation and maybe break down its testable elements for us?
Right. The general rule is that an aggressor usually loses the right to self-defense. Why? Because the force they're met with, like V's shot, is considered lawful force since it's defending against a crime.
Okay.
Now, for an aggressor to potentially regain that right, there are basically two elements they'd need to satisfy. First, the aggressor must have clearly withdrawn from the fight. And second, the force they are now facing must itself be unlawful.
Thank you. Now for the court's elemental analysis. Let's walk through this step by step. How did the court apply the first element, whether the aggressor D had withdrawn?
Well, the facts were pretty clear on that. D started the felony. He escalated things. There was no sign he tried to withdraw or communicate any withdrawal to V. You can't just stop attacking for a second and claim you've withdrawn. You need to make it clear you're backing off. So D failed the first element, no withdrawal.
Understood. Now, what about the second element? Was the force V used unlawful? Because V did shoot first after D pulled the gun, right?
Yeah, that's often a point of confusion, but the law clarifies it. Even though V fired the first shot, his force was legally justified self-defense against D's felony attempt, the robbery. So since V was acting lawfully, D was trying to defend himself against lawful force.
I see.
Therefore, D's claim fails on this second element too. The force he faced wasn't unlawful.
And after analyzing all the elements, what was the court's final conclusion?
The court concluded that D's killing of V was not justified. He was the initial aggressor in a deadly encounter he never withdrew, which meant V's defensive actions remain lawful. So D was properly found guilty of a crime.
That really clarifies the aggressor role. But you mentioned an aggressor could regain the right? That sounds a bit counterintuitive. When could that happen? Does proportionality come into play?
Yes, absolutely. This is where proportionality becomes crucial. It's sort of a fairness check. Imagine someone starts a fight, but just with fists, a non-deadly aggressor. If the person they attack responds with deadly force, say, pulls a knife or gun,
Right.
then the initial aggressor, the one who threw the first punch, regains the right to use necessary force, maybe even deadly force, to defend themselves. Why? Because the initial victim escalated things way out of proportion and is now using unlawful, excessive force.
Okay, that's a really helpful, almost visceral hypothetical. So A starts a fist fight, B pulls a bat, threatens to smash A's head. A then pulls a knife and stabs BA. The initial fist fighter could be justified because B brought unlawful deadly force into it.
Exactly. B's response was disproportionate.
Okay, moving from the act itself to the mindset. Self-defense needs a reasonable belief.
Oh.
What if you're wrong? What does the law say about being reasonably mistaken about the danger?
This brings us to the rule of mistake. So, the belief in the need for force has to be reasonable, judged objectively. But here's the thing. The defendant can be factually mistaken and still have the defense. The test is kind of a hybrid. It's objective, would a reasonable person have believed it? But it also considers the defendant's specific situation. Things like their size compared to the attacker, or if they knew the attacker had a violent past.
Okay.
It captures that famous line from Justice Holmes. Detached reflection cannot be demanded in the presence of an uplifted knife. You react to what you reasonably perceive in the heat of the moment.
Let's test that with another scenario. V threatens to kill D. Then V reaches quickly into his pocket, looks like he's going for a gun. D shoots V. Turns out V was just grabbing a handkerchief. Legally dispositive facts.
All right. V made a clear death threat. V then made a sudden movement towards his pocket, which looked like drawing a weapon. D reacted instantly with deadly force. And the later discovery. V was unarmed, just reaching for a handkerchief.
And the core legal issue.
Was D's belief that he needed to use deadly force reasonable at that moment, even though we later found out the gun wasn't real?
What rule of law did the court apply here? Can you state the rule and break down its elements for us again?
Sure. The rule is that self-defense is justified if the defendant reasonably believes they are in imminent danger of deadly harm. So the elements are, first, an actual subjective belief in the danger. Did D really believe it? And second, was that belief reasonable from an objective standpoint, considering the circumstances?
Okay, let's do the elemental analysis, step by step. How did the court handle the first element, D's actual subjective belief?
Well, based on V's threat, followed immediately by that sudden pocket reach, the court found D genuinely subjectively believed V was pulling a gun and was about to kill him. So yes, the first element, actual belief, was met.
Understood. Now, the crucial part, the second element. Was that belief objectively reasonable?
Yes, the court said it was. They emphasized looking at the situation as it reasonably appeared to D at the time. A direct death threat followed by a quick, ambiguous reach into a pocket. Objectively, that creates a reasonable basis for fearing immediate deadly harm, even if that appearance turned out to be false.
So even though D was wrong about the gun?
Exactly. The belief was reasonable given the available information in that split second.
And after analyzing both elements, what was the court's final conclusion?
D's use of deadly force was justified. His mistake about the weapon was reasonable under those very tense circumstances. The law generally doesn't punish someone for acting reasonably based on appearances, even if those appearances are misleading.
Okay, that covers who is defending and their state of mind. What about where they defend? Is there a duty to retreat? If someone's facing a deadly threat, does the law say they have to run away if they safely can, instead of using deadly force?
This is a major point of division in the law. The majority rule now, especially with all the stand-your-ground laws passed, says no. The defender does not have to retreat before using deadly force, even if they could have done so safely.
Okay.
But the minority rule, the older view, still requires retreat if it can be done safely. This is often called the retreat to the wall doctrine. You have to back up, if you can, before using deadly force. But note, this retreat requirement never applies to non-deadly force.
And how does the famous Castle Doctrine fit in with these newer stand-your-ground laws?
Right. The Castle Doctrine is the one exception pretty much everyone agrees on. Traditionally, you have no duty to retreat from your own home or usually your place of business. You can stand your ground there.
Makes sense.
What many recent stand-your-ground statutes have done is essentially take that Castle Doctrine idea, no duty to retreat, and extend it way beyond the home, often to any public place where you have a legal right to be.
That's a really significant legal change. What do the source materials say about the consequences or criticisms of extending stand your ground so broadly?
Well, keeping it impartial. The sources note that critics raise several concerns. They argue these laws can hinder law enforcement investigations, might be applied inconsistently, and could disproportionately impact minority groups. Some studies suggest a potential link to increased homicide rates.
Okay.
But the flip side of the policy debate is the focus on individual autonomy and the right not to be forced to retreat when facing an unlawful threat. It's a real tension.
Okay, let's pivot completely now. From defending people to defending stuff, property. How does proportionality work here? Can you ever use deadly force just to protect property?
The rule for defense of property is extremely strict. Precisely because of proportionality. You can use reasonable, non-deadly force to prevent someone from trespassing or stealing your things.
But,
But
right.
deadly force is never, ever reasonable solely to protect property. Full stop. The underlying legal principle is that human life is simply valued more highly than property. You can't kill someone just because they're trying to steal your TV.
That seems clear enough. Which brings us to maybe the most extreme example. Deadly mechanical devices, like spring guns. Source mentions a case. D sets up a deadly spring gun in an empty cabin to stop trespassers. T trespasses, gets killed by the gun. D claims justification. What are the key facts here?
Okay, the critical facts. Deadly force was used with the spring gun. The property was an empty cabin. No one was living there or present at the time. And T was killed essentially for trespassing, maybe planning to steal something minor. We don't know for sure.
In the core legal issue.
Can a killing caused by an automatic deadly trap be justified if the property owner wasn't there and the trap was set just to keep people out of an unoccupied building?
What rule of law did the court apply? State the rule and its elements specifically for defending a dwelling in this kind of context.
Right. The court basically said a killing by a device like this is justifiable only if the person who set the trap would have been justified in killing the intruder had they been present.
Okay, so it links back to personal justification.
Exactly. And for deadly force in defense of a dwelling, you usually need two elements. First, an unlawful invasion of an occupied dwelling. And second, a reasonable belief that the intruder intends to commit a serious felony inside or cause serious harm to the occupants.
Got it. Now for the court's elemental analysis, step by step. How did the court apply the first element, the unlawful invasion of an occupied dwelling?
Well, this element failed immediately. The cabin was empty. The justification for deadly force is primarily about protecting people inside the dwelling, not the structure itself. Since it wasn't occupied, the high threshold for using deadly force wasn't met.
Okay, that makes sense. The device can't know who's coming in. What about the second element, the intruder's intent to commit a felony or harm occupants?
This also fails, partly because the device is inherently indiscriminate. It can't tell if the trespasser is a dangerous felon, a lost child, or someone seeking shelter. The court pointed out that relying on such a device makes liability depend entirely on the luck of who triggers it or their secret intent, which isn't a workable legal standard. It violates the core principles of imminence and necessity.
And after analyzing all the elements, what was the court's final conclusion?
D's use of the spring gun was not justified. The court completely rejected the defense, aligning with the Model Penal Code's view that these kinds of deadly man-traps are essentially never justifiable, even in a dwelling, because they operate blindly and disproportionately. So we've covered a lot of ground, broken down these complex justification rules. To help you pull it all together, especially if you're facing an exam or analyzing a real-world situation, here's that diagnostic checklist, a kind of analytical shortcut. 1. Aggressor status check. First question. Was the person claiming defense the initial aggressor? If yes, stop and check. Did they effectively withdraw? Or did the initial victim respond with excessive unlawful force? 2. Lawfulness check. Was the force being defended against unlawful? Big exception here. Usually can't resist a lawful arrest, even if the arrest itself might be technically flawed unless the officer uses excessive force.
Right.
3. Imminence check. Was the threat reasonably perceived as immediate or imminent? This is often a high bar. Fear of future harm, even if it's certain, usually doesn't cut it under the strict standard. 4. Belief standard. 2 parts here. Did the defendant actually believe they were in danger? Subjective. And was that belief reasonable under the circumstances? Objective. Remember, if the belief was real but unreasonable, you might look at imperfect self-defense, which could reduce a murder charge, maybe to manslaughter.
Got it.
5. Proportionality force type. Was the force used deadly or non-deadly? Crucial check. Deadly force is never okay against a non-deadly attack. And it's never okay just to protect property. 6. Retreat duty. If deadly force was used, did the defendant have a duty to retreat? You have to know the jurisdiction. Is it stand your ground? Or does the castle doctrine apply because it happened in their home or maybe workplace?
That checklist really ties it together. This whole framework shows just how fine and how complex that line between justified self-preservation and unlawful violence really is. It seems like everything turns on reasonableness and proportionality in context.
Exactly right. And if you think about the bigger picture, the law, ideally, is structured to push people towards peaceful resolutions.
Yeah.
But this raises a really tough question for you to think about, especially in contexts like ongoing domestic abuse.
Yeah.
If the law demands that a battered spouse must wait until the abusive partner's violence is literally imminent, right now, happening this second, potentially eliminating any chance to act safely. Does that strict imminent standard actually achieve justice? Or does it end up trapping people, penalizing those caught in cycles of danger they can't escape until it's potentially too late? Something to consider.
That is a powerful thought to leave us with. Thank you so much for walking us through this really complex area of justification. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.